Bottom line is we're going to have to come up with a lot of energy and something that a lot of people have missed. The whole data revolution, which is ongoing, there's now these data warehouses, and they tend to try to locate in places that have relatively inexpensive power. So, bottom line is they're growing, and data has overtaken aviation in energy use. But guess what? AI, the artificial intelligence, takes it to a whole new level. Bill Gates was just in Houston at Circa Week, and he said, we've got to figure out how to come up with a lot more energy. Well, guess what? We're not going to get that from wind and solar. Yeah, wind and solar are great.
10-4. Okay, this is totally random. What was traffic like today on the way to work?
It was bad. So, so Houston has a lot of traffic, right? And for some reason, it was worse today, but it's a beautiful day in Houston, spring-like weather. And the interesting thing, and the thing I think about on the way to work is how important the oil field is to all of us, right? Because there are all these cars on the road, and even the electric vehicles, they still consume energy from our business. So there were a lot of cars on the road today.
Right, and it's the hypocrisy that's right in front of you that everyone seems to miss, which is that even if you wanted to do away with ICE, internal combustion engines, and you want to go all electric, you still need plastics to make the dashboards and to make the components, and those come from petroleum products. So I think that the hype is very overblown in this sense. There's always people who make money from taking one side of the issue or the other. I think that's a fair assessment. And I think that it's just very short-sighted to say that things need to end and we have to be carbon-free by a certain date. All these things are very arbitrary, and they serve, I think, very false purposes, because the reality is quite the contrary. What do you say?
So the reality is absolutely contrary. And, it's not just the plastics that are in a Tesla, for example. It's the electricity that's needed to power the batteries. And the bottom line is that the only fuel that we have that can fill the gap is natural gas. And bottom line is we're going to have to come up with a lot of energy, and something that a lot of people have missed. The whole data revolution, which is ongoing, there's now these data warehouses, and they tend to try to locate in places that have relatively inexpensive power.
Mhm.
So bottom line is they're growing, and data has overtaken aviation in energy use. But guess what? AI, the artificial intelligence, takes it to a whole new level. Bill Gates was just in Houston at Circa Week, and he said, we've got to figure out how to come up with a lot more energy. Well, guess what? We're not going to get that from wind and solar. Wind and solar are great. We need all the energy we can find, wherever we find it. And, someday we'll have nuclear power reactors again, but that day's not today. And there's only one, hydrocarbons are the only thing that fill the gap. It's that simple. So,
Do you see a future? I'm sorry, please continue. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, sir. And you had mentioned about natural gas in vehicles, and I think that I had read a couple of articles recently that they were successfully testing, cars working on natural gas. Do you think it's not? And it just occurred to me now, if we were to take a look back on history and see that, the car and the way the car is invented, everything was very circumstantial, and we take things for granted today that things have always been this way, and that's very not true. Even going back to what our previous conversation, that people are making it up as they go along when there are pioneers in a certain area. But maybe wouldn't it be interesting if we were to say, from a meta standpoint, a thoroughly thoughtful standpoint, we are going to need to transition. Maybe gasoline as a fuel is not the way, but we should move to natural gas vehicles. And we can plan that those vehicles will operate for 20 to 30 years while we work on something else. Again, thinking about it in a new kind of a way, and say, this technology is a stopgap technology at the moment, but we're using it because it is weaning us off gas. At least that would it would make them put their money where their mouth is.
So, so I have a couple of ideas. One, when you have a forklift in your plant, a lot of them run off propane, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's convenient. You don't get a lot of emissions out of it, so you don't have to worry about carbon monoxide, things like that. So natural gas vehicles have been around for a long time. And in fact, in Houston, the largest beer distributor runs all their trucks locally on natural gas. They've got a compressed natural gas filling station. They all fuel up every evening, and so natural gas can fill that void. But I think practically what we're talking about, the world needs electricity, and I think there's a lot of reasons that electric cars are compelling. They're compelling because they're simpler. They're easier to update with software, things like that. So there's less parts in an electric car. So I see the real need for electricity, and I think what you'll see ultimately are a lot of these small aeroderivative turbine gas plants that are converting natural gas to electricity. And we're already seeing that in the oil field. In a lot of ways, the oil field's a leader. Look at some of the things they're doing with the electric fleets right now, where they're taking field gas, converting it to electricity to power the fleet. So I think you're going to see more electrical progress rather than just direct replacement of gasoline with compressed natural gas. So, cars only last a certain amount of time, but electric cars, batteries only last a certain amount of time. But the technology developing now for batteries is improving rapidly. I think natural gas and hydrocarbons are going to be around for a long, long time. And natural gas has actually cleaned up the environment significantly. Our carbon emissions in America have gone down, whereas countries like Germany that went all renewables, their carbon emissions are up right now. And part of it's because they shut down their nuclear power plants that don't emit carbon, and now they're burning coal again. So it's a bizarre situation, but I think, unfortunately, politicians don't always have the best path forward.
No, that's very true. And I think that a lot of times we see in the oil field and in other places where people will spend a dime. What was it? They'll save a dime to lose a nickel or something like that. Where it's
they'll
again,
spend $1 to save a dime.
There you go. Exactly. Thank you. And it's interesting, whenever you have a new technology that rolls out, it makes a lot of sense that there would be a lot of hiccups, a lot of things to be worked out, and a lot of room for improvement. Where, at least in the conventional, we'll call it, or traditional oil and gas industry, it's been around for so long, like the internal combustion engine, it's now just a question of refinement and perfection, and just improvement and continuous improvement. And I think a lot of people also mistake, or rather, they don't take into account that the oil field is, or the major players, and everyone who works, service companies and everyone, we're some of the primary people who care about the environment, because we're the primary people who are there. And we understand there's people who are looking over our shoulders, condemning everything that we're doing. The same thing with safety. Safety is a primary concern in the oil field beyond any level that any other industry takes it. But we don't get recognized for that. It's very convenient. Once again, there's a phrase, which is, you always come to resent those that you depend on. And after a while, because of that dependency, I can see that. I can very much see that. Let me ask you a different kind of a question, though. We were talking a little bit earlier. You had mentioned you're a serial entrepreneur. And of course, this is one of the things that I majorly respect. How many companies have you started?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have to think about that for a minute. But maybe the place to start is how I got into the oil field. I come from a
Okay.
family of coal miners in eastern
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky. My mother's family, they went down in the deep mines and mined coal. And I thought I would be a coal miner myself. So I went to the University of Kentucky. And fortunately, my academic advisor, was the head of the civil engineering department. And he said, "Look, Kevin, you should be a civil engineer, not a mining engineer, because you can still do mining engineering if you're a civil engineer. But if you're a mining engineer, you can't do any of the other civil engineering functions."
Mm-hmm.
Sort of made sense to me. And actually, I had went to work for a coal company for a summer, and my boss there said, "Well, that does make sense. So focus on civil engineering, because who knows when things change." At that time, it was in the late 70s, and people were still talking about nuclear energy and things like that. So
Right.
people weren't sure coal would last forever. But so I took that route. And then I love to tell people this. The first day on the job, I went to work for Halliburton Services. I was dumping a friction reducer on a frac job. And that's back before people worried as much about safety and
Mm-hmm.
such. Not that they were not safe. I mean, they tried to hire the best possible people that understood how to work in the environment. But bottom line is, you were thrown out there day one. So I had gone to work for Halliburton, went into a training program with them, and really learned a lot. And one of the key takeaways I learned was how people at Halliburton work, or
Mm-hmm.
people in the oil field work, how the work is done. So as an engineer, you can dream up all kinds of great things, right? But if they can't implement in the field, it's worthless.
Right.
So, and I saw a lot of that at Halliburton, where practically we were given like these little flow meters to take to the field for the first crosslink gel jobs. And I was up on a blender, we're watching it, and the meter just wouldn't really, it kept bouncing around. We couldn't figure out how fast it was going. So the blender operator took his 3-pound hammer and banged the meter a little too hard and it quit working. So the rest of the job, we had to eyeball it into, and Halliburton was smart. They figured out, hey, we need to dilute this stuff. We can't run it a tenth of a gallon per thousand. That's crazy. So
Right.
those are the kind of lessons I learned. So I then went to work for a startup pumping service company. And in some ways, that was the start of my entrepreneurial career because they hired me to go to a new location, start a new camp, put the equipment in, everything. And obviously, I had people backing me up, but it was a good transition to kind of get into entrepreneurship.
How old were
And
you? Real quick, how old were you at that time?
so I was young. I had been out of school 3 years. And funny story was the owner of the business said, we tried to hire this guy, we tried to hire that guy. They all turned us down. So now we're here talking to you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll take it. Right.
Yeah, I'll take it. And actually became my lifelong mentor in business and partner in business later. But the next step, I went to work for these guys. They still exist. They're part of Patterson UTI. It's
Mm,
Universal Pressure Pumping.
yeah.
And they were a great company to go to, entrepreneurial spirit, competed heads up with Halliburton and at that time Schlumberger, Dowell. And it was a great experience, great learning experience. Had to hire people, fire people,
Mhm.
had to manage things. It was a real learning experience. So, unfortunately, the owners of the company were a gas utility in Philadelphia and the people I worked for. And they said, look, the gas utility got in trouble where the Public Utilities Commission said, you guys are wasting all your money in the oil field. We're not going to allow the next rate increase. So they had to divest. Make a long story short, the
Mhm.
company had to change. And so I was kind of left without any ownership or whatever. I decided to start a chemical company. And I went back to one of the founders of Universal Well Services, and he provided the funding help, became my partner, and we started a company called Clearwater Incorporated. And honestly, I thought we were going to be doing water treatment all the time.
Mhm.
And we literally were selling the same polymers used in the oil field for friction reducers to water treatment. And our first big account was a company that spun off of an oil field company, and they were a great account until they weren't. What we
Right.
didn't realize, everyone was hiring people to close impoundments, waste lagoon impoundments that they had generated over years and years and years, and they were having to replace them with treatment plants.
Mhm, mhm.
And in hindsight, it was very clear what was happening. So the market was kind of a finite opportunity. But we learned a lot about water treatment during that time, and we were we were also working in the oil field, and that company ended up being really the vehicle that took us a long way forward. So the company was Clearwater Incorporated. We ultimately sold it to Weatherford in Houston, and they said, Kevin, you need to move to Houston. And honestly, I wanted to move to Houston, so it sort of made sense. But we had built some other businesses, so we had already done some business with Weatherford. So Bottom line was we had chemistry, we had engineering, and we got into the drilling part of the business because we had a great product for, at the time, underbalanced drilling. Now they call it managed pressure drilling.
Mm.
So we had started a company called ECD Northwest for equivalent circulating density. Northwest came from another company we had bolted on to that group. And the bottom line is Weatherford said we need to be in managed pressure drilling, at the time underbalanced drilling. And so they bought that group from us. And we had been very successful with it. And then they bought another piece of the business from us, which was pipeline services. So if you have these high pressure compressors, you can do pipeline services, pressure testing, and whatnot. And we were working on a very big project called Blue Stream that was a pipeline from Russia to Turkey, across the Black Sea, and it was really interesting project. So Weatherford said, "Well, we can't give you any credit for that project," but they gave us an override on all pipeline services. That
Mm.
project came to fruition. It was a big boost for Weatherford. It was a great project, and some of our former people at ECD Northwest headed up the project, got it done, and so Weatherford called and said, "Wait a minute, you guys, we can't afford to pay you all this money."
Right.
And so we negotiated to sell that pipeline business essentially to Weatherford, kind of override on the business. But we'd also started up a magnesium hydroxide water treatment company that we sold to Martin Marietta. Uh, we had also had a joint venture with another company in what was called the Appalachian Basin,
Mhm.
that they also made foamers for underbalanced drilling. So we sold that back to the founder's family, and we sold Weatherford, the ECD Northwest, the pipeline override, and then they came back to us and said, "We need to buy the rest of your company because we didn't realize how important the chemistry was." And so for 2 years, I went to work for Weatherford, and actually I enjoyed that time immensely. Weatherford was very dynamic at that time, very entrepreneurial at that time. But the interesting thing was it was harder to sell to Weatherford from the inside than it was from the outside. So internally, people had their own supply of products and such that they wanted to buy from what was now Weatherford's competitors. Before, when we were just out knocking on their door trying to sell, it worked pretty well. But anyway, we learned the ropes with the big company, and it was ultimately Weatherford sold that business to Lubrizol. Uh, I worked for Weatherford a couple of years and just honestly had the desire to do something new. I was too young to retire and too not smart enough to stay at Weatherford longer. One of my colleagues who did stay at Weatherford a long time said, "Kevin, you left too soon. I stayed too long."
Ah,
Uh,
right.
but the bottom line is Weatherford was a great company, great opportunity, and they were good stewards of that chemical business we had sold to them.
Mhm.
But I couldn't wait to start something new, so I started a company called Total Separation Solutions with Shell Oil Company. And honestly, that was a very frustrating experience because Shell Oil Company uh, is a great company. They're really a super company, but when you are partners with them, they take a totally different approach to the business than an entrepreneur would.
Right.
And they had started a group that was investing in oil field technologies that they thought would help lead the way. And we were in the filtration fluids processing business, total separation solutions. It was a kind of a trick name. We removed the total suspended solids. So
Mm-hmm.
TSS was the
Yes.
acronym. And so that kind of fit with what we were doing. And we were making a lot of progress in the Gulf of Mexico. And unfortunately, Macondo, the BP blowout in the Gulf of Mexico happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that Shell had a lot of their money invested in offshore Gulf of Mexico, including for us, and they basically shut the company down.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I couldn't tell them no. It was they were the primary owner. They had like 80% of the business when they
Right.
converted the equity that they had put into it into stock. So it was unfortunate the day the Macondo blowout happened. We were scheduled to take equipment offshore to one of the rigs that ultimately came in to drill the relief holes that they had to drill to get the well under control.
Wow.
But we had all this equipment. We had all this. Anyway, just an unfortunate thing that happens. But in entrepreneurship, you've got to realize you've got to be flexible. You got to be ready for whatever comes and
Yeah.
happens. And Shell was a great learning experience. Not, I can't say enough good things about Shell. It's just trying to line up a major oil company with an entrepreneurial organization was a challenge. That was the main challenge. But they're a great company, and they we still have a lot of contacts within Shell to this day. So that
Right.
was a good company. And then so I actually revived the total separation solutions business model. Shell had let all the patents expire, had said, "Hey, we're not interested in this business." So
Hmm.
they totally got out of anything. So we went to the auction they had for the equipment and bought the equipment and restarted the business as Highland Fluid Technology. However, if you look at the history of the Gulf of Mexico, it has never completely recovered after Macondo.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that's because shale took off. So we realized we really needed to be more in the onshore business, in the Permian and places like that. So that's where we started moving from that offshore market into the onshore shale unconventional market. And that was smart because practically I'd say the offshore business still struggles. In fact, you see that a lot of companies have switched your investment profile to go more with shale. You can drill a well quickly, easily, for a lot less money, a lot less risk. And, frankly, the Macondo, I think it dampened that activity offshore because people obviously realized the risk that could happen. And the things that were supposed to work, like the blowout preventer, rams, didn't fire, didn't work. I mean, it's so complex out there that
Mhm.
I think that will always hold that business back. Um, so deepwater Gulf of Mexico was not the future. So we migrated to chemistry. And the first thing we did, I knew friction reducers very well. In fact, going back to the Clearwater days,
Mhm.
I had bought a old pickup truck that had been used in the oil field by pumpers. It had, I don't know, 250,000 miles on it, and the first delivery I ever made to an oil field customer was to the old Nausco well service.
Oh, wow.
2 drums of friction reducer. And so friction reducer's kind of been in my blood all this time. And practically, it's a great product. It's so at Highland Fluid Technology, we migrated into friction reducers. We set up grinding in Houston through a toll manufacturer, and we took particle size of like 1 to 2 micron or 1 to 2 millimeter and converted into micron sized particles that you could use in the oil field.
Wow.
And there are a lot of water treatment polymers out there. So bottom line is that we picked the right one for kind of high salt applications and started grinding polymers. And then it morphed into selling the business to SciDev, which is science development, shortened into SCIDEV. Uh, they're an Australian company. And at that time, the CEO was real interested in the oil field because they were in mining
Mhm.
and the oil field looked attractive. And the oil field is the biggest volume for polyacrylamide, friction reducer, water treatment type polymers. So he was keen to get into the oil field. Unfortunately, his timing was terrible. March 1st of 2020, just at the onset of COVID. So we became part of SciDev Limited, and it was really tough because oil went negative, right? I mean, people are out looking for tanks. They could buy, people would pay them to take oil. So
Yeah. Yeah,
the next
exactly.
month they would sell it at a profit, they
Right.
figured.
Right.
It only happened one time that oil went negative, but
Negative.
the business was in the doldrums for a long time.
Yes.
And uh, so the CEO lost his job, and it was time for me to do something new. And so where I am now, we are the second largest polyacrylamide manufacturer in the world.
The second
Uh,
largest in the world?
in the world,
The whole world.
the
The whole
whole
world.
world,
The whole world. Okay, copy. Just
the
want to make
whole
sure.
world.
Okay,
We
wonderful.
have world scale plants. We produce acrylic acid. We produce acrylamide. We produce AETAC monomers.
Hmm.
And now we just started up production of DADMAC monomer. And these are all monomers that go into our polymers. And we've got well over 1 million metric tons of capacity at this point. So,
Wow.
and we're expanding, we're growing. We've got plans to put plants closer to the market, et cetera. The company itself is only about 20 years old.
Hmm.
So, how does this relate to entrepreneurship? First of all, the owner of the business started in his backyard, which is very similar to my startup at Clearwater Incorporated, which was in my garage. But he needed someone to start up the business in North America. They had enjoyed lots of business in the past, but a couple things happened, COVID being one. They had lost a lot of business. A lot of primary customers kind of went away during COVID.
Yeah.
So he said, look, I want to start an office here. I want to put inventory in place. So I'm working for a big company now. They did over $1 billion in sales last year, but still being an entrepreneur in a way, because starting over, starting from the ground up and building the business. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's also fun because I'm getting into some new areas, for example, in mining.
Mm-hmm.
And mining uses the same polymers we use as friction reducers. They use them for mine tailings, cleanup, things like that. And then there's a whole water treatment business out there that is growing and expanding, and it's a great business. And things you wouldn't even think about. For example, we've got one customer that they just focus on meat plants, and chicken plants in particular are their specialty. And when you have a lot of chickens going through your plant, bottom line is you've got to clean up all that wastewater. There's a lot of biological oxygen demand from chicken waste. And so it's really interesting how people are building businesses in areas like that where they're focused on knowing that business intimately and understanding it. And what they've done that's interesting is they'll combine equipment with the chemistry for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And waste is an interesting business. Generally, people want to minimize waste, right? Because it's expensive to get rid of. So if you give them a turnkey solution, that's what people like, because their main
Right.
business is processing chickens.
Right. Of
So we
course.
can all have chicken, and keep Kentucky Fried Chicken in business, but in
Right.
Chick-fil-A, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so they're out processing the chicken, and the last thing they want to worry about is, am I meeting all my EPA compliance and everything in my wastewater treatment plant? Uh, Bottom line is it's smart to offer a turnkey solution. So we're seeing
Right.
more and more of that in industry. So it's
Until until that
fascinating.
until that chicken producer becomes so big that they just buy you out. They're like, you know what? We need all this operation. We're just going to buy the whole thing, because somehow it seems that happens everywhere you go. That seems to happen behind you. Um, but and you did very presciently answer my question, but let me put a little more nuance to it. So I'm making my notes, and I was thinking about when you were at Universal pressure pumping, what it was like when you were at Clearwater, because that was your own startup, and then what you had mentioned when you were working with and for Weatherford. And so I'm getting the feeling that at Universal and at Weatherford, even though they were, let's say, larger organizations, there was still a lot of intrapreneurial work that you were doing, is you were an entrepreneur
That's
within the
correct.
system, right? But the companies themselves allowed and fostered that system, and that's what
Right.
allowed you to get ahead, right? Okay, wonderful. um, and so there you go, and this is how it marries up. So how is it today, where you are today, which is again such a large company, but you're used to something much scrappier, much more guerrilla, get it done, welded in the alley at 2 in the morning, damn it all, if it's got to be done. Like, how does that
That's a
bump
good
up?
point. Yeah, so that's a really good question. and I mentioned that he had started this business, the owner had started this business 20 years ago, literally in his backyard. So I work essentially for the owner of the business. And that allows me to bypass the traditional infrastructure, and they've got plenty of it, and they've got plenty of challenges. And like any big company, they've got silos and such. But this is sort of his vision. So that's what makes it easy to maneuver and operate. And going back to Weatherford, I knew the CEO, I knew the president, but ultimately you become a cog in a big machine, and so I was doing it while it was fun, and when it started to become like drudgery,
Yeah.
I had to find something fun to do again. So,
Right.
and for example, with SciDev, we sold the business to SciDev, and the CEO we sold it to, unfortunately, lost his job because he invested in the oil field. And practically, one thing that happened to him was ESG. So all of a sudden, the Australians were all in on ESG, and people are saying, "Why do you invest in a business that's dying, which is oil and gas?" And so he tried his best to answer those questions, but the market didn't turn around fast enough for
No.
him. So they brought in a new CEO, and so practically it wasn't nearly as much fun as before. And before, I'd talk to the CEO regularly, and he'd say, "Let's do this. What do you think?" The new CEO said, "No, we're doing this way." And and it's not that it was a bad way. They've done very well. They're very successful. It just, for me, it was time for a new challenge. So here I am today, back in polymers for friction reducers, and yeah, it's
Back to where you start, but back to where you started,
exactly.
and I would assume, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, because everyone's path and everyone's journey is a little bit different. But I'm very partial to that portion of the industry that I came in to work with.
Mhm.
So I'm very passionate about water treatment. I'm very passionate about chlorine dioxide. I know that is so much more of a smaller part of the market today than it was, but I'm still very passionate about that, right? Like I still am. So I can understand that the excitement that you must feel. You're coming back to something that you have a very deep history with it. You have, I mean, frankly, obviously, all the industry contacts. You know everybody. Um,
I don't
I
know
mean, you
about
do.
that, but
Well, really, okay. Well, I'll find the three people that you don't know, and then we'll throw a party or something. Because with the history that you have, and and the value that you've created along the way. I mean, I think that's something really to be applauded, and something that a lot of people really don't. And again, it arcs to something we spoke about earlier. So let me take this whole thing and let me turn it back to you as a question. When you work as hard as that you do, and you have that entrepreneurial spirit, right? That just doesn't allow you to rest. You're very restless, in a manner of speaking. And people see the results of your work. So they see the companies that you've built. They see the white pickup that you took the two drums out. They can see that. But what are some of the things that some people don't see about being a leader and being an entrepreneur? What are some of the personal challenges that you face when you wake up in the morning to come and do this thing every day?
well, usually when you wake up in the morning, you've spent most of the night sleeping intermittently because you're worried about all kinds of things uh, that some are in your control, some are out of your control. But being an entrepreneur means you really have to make decisions. You can't be wishy-washy. And basically, I worked with a gas utility at Universal Well Services. And one time they told me to build a power plant is a 20-year decision. No one can pinpoint when you actually do it. And one thing that became evident is if you make no decision, you probably won't like the decision that's made for you. So the one thing you can do is be proactive all the time. And that, I think that's one of the main things about entrepreneurship. And when you step out on your own, you are on your own. You don't have a HR department at Weatherford that tells you, oh, we'll take care of this problem you have with an employee, or you don't have a financial group that says, oh, don't worry, we'll make that payment, we'll take care of it. You're literally, handwriting out your own checks to pay people.
Yeah.
And, if you don't write that check out, they'll quit selling to you. So,
Right.
so I think there's people don't realize how on your own you are. And then you start hiring people, and they'll never be quite the same as they'll never have the same drive, or they'd be doing it on their own. But on the other hand, you've got to figure out how to motivate them. And typically, I think the best way to motivate people is with leadership. Make timely decisions, let them know where they stand, and be a good leader and put in as many hours as they do, even more. And, let them know what you're doing to help advance the company and for everyone's benefit. So, yeah, I think leadership is one of those things that you get it by hard work, not by being smarter than everyone else. It's hard work.
It is, because it was making decisions, as you said before, and the problem with decisions is that whenever you make a decision, it pleases the people that you favor, and it upsets the people that you don't.
That's a good point.
But it's always the quality of those. It's the quality of those decisions, and I have found that if you really are coming from a place of integrity, and where everyone understands that honesty, integrity, and fairness, and taking everything into account as much as possible, that people always respect your decision, because they understand that you're not trying to play things one way or another. Your integrity really has to be solid. What you present and who you are have to be synonymous. Well, first of all, because you get called out immediately, and especially in our industry. And especially in our industry, if you get called out, everybody knows it very quickly. This is a very small business for as large as it is. And so I respect that. Let me ask you this, however. Can you think of a time where you made a leadership decision that you're really, really proud of, that you say, I didn't really recognize it at the time, but that really did it for me?
Well, that's a good question. I think the primary thing that I'm most proud of is the number of people that been able to hire and build teams out of, and and I think that takes a lot of effort to do it right. But if you hire the right people, you'll be successful. And I learned early on. In fact, my mentor, who hired me at Universal Well Services, he said you should always be looking to work yourself out of a job so that you can move up in an organization. So, in other words, give give that work to others. I think we've all seen people that they want to do it all by themselves, right? Uh, and and you can't do that. You really have to build a team. And I think that that's something I learned over time, that team building is phenomenally important to success, because you cannot do it all by yourself. And you've got to also make sure you give credit to your team in all cases. So you can't steal someone else's credit. You always need to be helping them improve what they're doing, and give them the credit for what they're doing. So I think it's really important to build a team, and that's probably the epiphany that I woke up in the middle of the night and figured out that, hey, I've got to depend on others. I've got to build a team so that we can grow. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned. Uh,
What are three things that you think of today when you're going to bring someone on your team? What are three things that you kind of look for, that you kind of overlay paradigm in your head?
So, a couple things, well, three things. So, one, I think you have to have someone that agrees with the direction you're going. Uh, and two, you have to have someone that has similar work ethics. Uh, and three, you need someone that's flexible, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like when Macondo happened in Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, actually Shell supported us for a while, trying to figure out what to do next, and we had some people that were not flexible. Shell was very good to everyone. They said, "Look, we've got jobs in other companies here. You can go to work, in a different area." And they they did a good job with everyone, but not everyone was willing to even do that.
Mm.
So I think finding people that are also flexible is key to success. So we're hiring people now. So for example, we've hired a sales manager, and he's got a lot of experience. We just hired a PhD polymer scientist, which we're bringing on board in a couple weeks, building out a laboratory here.
Wow,
So,
things are growing.
yeah,
Well,
that's the plan. We're going to grow. Absolutely.
that's fantastic. And actually, as we come to draw to a conclusion, because also I want to respect your time. Obviously, you're a very busy man, and I appreciate the time you've given us. Um, how are what are some of the initiatives that you're taking on today in the position in the company that you're in? Tell us a little bit about the initiatives that you have coming on, what you're really excited about. What are some of the products you think are really going to move the needle in the industry?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because there are a couple things that I think are key to this industry. I have been talking about this for a long time, and it's been a passion of mine, which is all the produced water that we make. For every barrel of oil produced in the Permian, there's 4 to 5 barrels of water that's really not so usable.
Right.
Uh, and bottom line is, we've got to come to a we've got to find solutions. And here to date, the solution was simple. We would pump all this water, we would inject it back down into disposal wells, But now we're getting earthquakes, we're getting, the Texas Railroad Commission's being forced to make changes, whether people in the Permian are worried about it or not. Water has become a big issue. And the bottom line is that it's still a waste product. And I like to say this, everyone's an environmentalist if they can save money.
Right, of course. Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
think
Yep.
about that. I mean, you hear that
Mhm.
all the time. Well, you hear about people saying, "Oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do that," and then they fail at it because the latest one I read about was this company that was going to make fibers for clothing out of recycled material. And guess what? Their fibers were 2 to 3 times more expensive, and they failed because they forgot the first rule of being an environmentalist.
Right.
Everyone's an environmentalist if they can save money. So don't do stupid things.
Right.
Figure out how to fix the water problem up front. Leave the water where it is, for example. And there's chemistries and technologies out there to do that. So leave it in place, produce a minimum amount of water. You've got a balloon that you're slowly letting the air out of, which is reservoir pressure.
Hmm.
And so if you're slowly letting the air out of your balloon, let it push oil to the wellbore instead of all that water. And then
Right.
water is very costly because you have to lift it out of the well. So that takes more electricity if you have
Right.
any kind of pump, right?
Of
So
course.
so I think going forward, we've got to find ways to mitigate the amount of water we produce. And we will do that. There's no question. The technology's there, and this is a dynamic area of business. We'll also figure out ways to use that water for our benefit. And what do
Right.
I mean by that? So, for example, one of the challenges we have in the oil field is all the coal fired power plants are shutting down. That means the fly ash that we mix with all our cement to extend cement is going away. So, what do we have in all that produced water? But a lot of calcium that we can convert into either calcium carbonate, or you could take CO2 and put it with the calcium and make calcium carbonate that could be an extender for cement. You could actually even make calcium sulfate with all the H2S that's in the oil field. You could convert it to calcium sulfate, which is gypsum board that's in your house. We won't go as far as putting it in people's houses, but we could put it in wells to
Right.
eliminate fly ash with an inexpensive additive. Well, out of that same brine, we can also get clean salt water. We can also get metals like lithium
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
the
Right.
future. But clean salt water can be converted into chlorine and caustic. The Clorox everyone uses
Of course.
regularly is a chlorine part of it, and the caustic soda is a basic building block of all
Everything.
inorganic chemistry. So yeah, I see the oil field developing lots of unique technologies going forward. I think they'll be focused on water because it's become evident that we've got to do something. And maybe the time's right. 10 years ago, Warren Buffett was right. Being 10 years too soon is a bad decision, is making a bad decision.
Right.
So I think practically the oil field, the timing's right now to come up with some of these solutions, make them work. And a lot of people are looking at what do we do? How do we do it? And as you know, oil field water is being recycled now,
Yep.
and I think you'll see more and more recycling. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very bullish about the future because the
Okay.
oil's there with data and AI. It's like the Model T all over again.
Yeah.
When Henry Ford invented the Model T, I don't know that anyone had the vision that we would have roads connecting all of America.
Right.
But really, it grew exponentially because as soon as the people had a Model T, they said, "Well, I want to go see, my aunt. I want to go
Right.
see, I want to drive from New York City to Long Island. So let's build
Right.
a better road." And they
Right.
did. And as soon as they built the road, the people in Long Island said, "Oh, I can go to New York City. I'm gonna buy a Model T," and it took off exponentially. I think
Really.
we're in that phase with data and AI where it's taking off exponentially, and we don't even know where it's all going. We don't understand that yet. And the bottom line is we'll be shocked at the innovations that come out of AI. But they require a lot of energy to make them work. So
Yep.
I'm bullish on the future, and we will solve all our problems in the oil field. Now is the time when we have solutions for all the produced water we have.
Right.
So, and we'll find ways to make everyone in the oil field an environmentalist because they're saving money.
Eventually, right? The Holy Grail. Kevin, I very much appreciate your time and your insights, especially into the future of the industry and discussing, about your background. It's fascinating. And would you join us again on the show in the future?
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Oh, I
So,
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Kevin Smith, thank you very much. We appreciate you. Please, could you tell the folks the name of the name of your company, and if they wanted more information, where they can reach out to
yeah, so
regarding your
the name
products
of
and
the
services?
company is NNA Polymers Incorporated. So our website is just NNA with an S.com.
Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Well, I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you very much. And you have a wonderful day. And listen, keep on bringing that entrepreneurial spirit to the big corporate giants or wherever you've gone, because remember, your big paycheck at the end of the day counts on it. So there you go.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Kevin. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
The Oilfield Leader Podcast is brought to you by executive producer Daniel Corral, executive producer Jim Lynn, executive producer and voice talent, me, Mad Mac, production assistant Caleb Knott. The Oilfield Leader Podcast is produced and hosted by Christian Lombardini. Copyright 2024. The Oilfield Leader and Christian Lombardini, all rights reserved. Peace.